Hello. Mm, is it on? Is it on? Can everyone hear me? Thank you. You all got yourselves ready by stopping your chatter and waiting in hushed anticipation. So I think I should absolutely start this amazing event. So thank you for coming. I am extremely excited to see all of you. My name is Melissa Gregory. I'm the Dean of the College of Arts and Letters. We are the college that is very proud to be hosting this event tonight, and I'm just so delighted to welcome all of you here. Let me start off by offering my sincerest thanks to the UToledo College of Law for allowing us to use this wonderful auditorium, and also to the Mikhail Lecture Committee for the hard work that they do every year to make this a successful event. This includes John Mikhail, Leila Wagner, Tess Wagner, and Drs. Gabby Saman, Samir Abu Abzi, and Paroma Sarkar. Next, let me point out that the Mikhail Lecture has a green program, which means it is online. If you point your phone at the QR code on the screen here, you can access tonight's lineup of speakers, which is relatively simple, but still you can get to it. And you can also learn a bit more about the history of the lecture. Also, if you are so inclined, we never turn away donations to the fund since any contribution helps us continue to bring in the very high quality speakers that we have come to expect for this annual event. So I would like to officially begin tonight's event by reading a land acknowledgement statement, which is a custom that recognizes and honors the indigenous people who have been living and working in this area for centuries. The University of Toledo acknowledges that the region of Ohio in which the university sits is the ancestral homelands of the Seneca, Erie, and Ottawa, as well as places of trade for indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, Kilitika, Lenape, Kaskaskia, Kickapoo, Miami, Muncie, Peoria, Piankashaw, Shawnee, Wea, and Wyandot. As steward of public lands, it is our responsibility to understand the history of the land, the peoples who came before us, and their continuing ties to this place. We thank them for their strength and resilience in protecting this land, and aspire to uphold our responsibilities according to their example. So with that, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to both our in-person audience and our virtual watchers to the 2024 Maryse and Ramzy Mikhail Memorial Lecture. By way of background, the Mikhail Memorial Lecture is an annual event that is made possible through the Maryse and Ramzy Mikhail Endowment Fund at the University of Toledo. This fund came into being thanks to a generous donation from the Mikhail family established in the year 2000, and in 2024, it is now one of the College of Arts and Letters' oldest and most long-running funded lecture series. The purpose of the fund is to support an annual lecture dealing with some aspect of Arab culture, whether that is literature or music, politics, religion, or economics, or any other aspect of life in the countries of the Middle East, in honor of Maryse Mikhail, who was a woman who believed in the power of education to bring human beings together into dialogue and compromise. The fund also prioritizes issues of peace and justice. We thank Maryse for the example she set in her efforts to create a more just and equitable world, and for the legacy of Maryse and Ramzy together as a couple who lived the values of compassion, care, and mutual respect, and who honored the beauty and richness of their Arabic heritage. Again, our sincerest thanks to the Mikhail family, some of whom are with us here tonight, and some of whom are watching online, for your generous gift to the university, and for helping us elevate the conversation about Arabic culture at the local, national, and international level. At this point, I'm sure you're very eager for me to get to the main event, so allow me to introduce Leila Wagner, who will be telling you a little bit more about tonight's speaker. Leila is a daughter of Maryse and Ramzy Mikhail, and she, along with her siblings, was a driving force in establishing this lecture series. After 35 years leading marketing and communications for various agencies, companies, and nonprofits, Leila is the self-proclaimed chief dot connector of her solo consulting firm Strategy for Hire, and she recently joined the board of Sunshine Communities. Leila is a graduate of the University of Notre Dame. She and her husband, Ben, are the proud parents of Beau, Kate, and Tess, and the delighted grandparents of Jack, age 3, and Naya, age 2. Ben and Leila live in Maumee, Ohio. Please join me in welcoming Leila Waggoner to the podium so she can introduce our guest speaker tonight. Thank you.
I have to lower this. Thank you so much, Dean Gregory. And on behalf of my family, thanks to all of you for joining us this evening, and a warm welcome to those joining online as well. I have the distinct fangirl privilege of introducing this year's speaker, Leila Fadel, co-host of NPR's flagship news program, Morning Edition, and of the Up First podcast. I grew up listening to NPR. Our family moved to Toledo in 1970. The following year, NPR introduced All Things Considered, and my dad was a big fan. Years later, when I was in high school, Morning Edition made its debut, and Dad had even more reasons to tune in to the local public radio station. We accumulated quite a collection of WGTE tote bags. So as a kid, the voices of Susan Stamberg and Bob Edwards, along with reporters from around the world, brought us the news of the day and transported us to faraway places. They introduced us to people, and they shared their stories. I think the depth of international coverage by public media was particularly important to and appreciated by my parents. As immigrants, they were certainly interested in domestic news, and they were deeply committed to staying informed about what was happening all around the world. Many times, though, I remember them both shouting at the TV, shaking their heads, angered and frustrated by the narrow perspectives and predictable narratives being relayed in brief sound bites about what was happening in the Middle East, and supposedly why. At the time, I'm embarrassed now to say, I probably just rolled my eyes, not quite understanding why it was so important. Today, I'm the one shouting at many of the headlines and stories in my newsfeed. When the incomparable author and media critic Jack Shaheen spoke on this stage at the 12th annual Mikhail Memorial Lecture, he paraphrased the words of Edward R. Murrow. What we do not see or hear or read is just as important, or perhaps more important, as what we do see or hear or read. This effect of being unaware lies at the heart of what my parents sought to counteract with the establishment of this lecture series. And for years before that, it was the focus of my mother's activism. She knew that the best way to increase understanding and recognize the humanity in each other is to share stories, to make introductions, to bring people together, to familiarize and welcome and embrace, rather than exclude and other, and allow fear and its insidious partner hate to fester in the absence of knowledge. My mother was an idealist and a pragmatist. She was frustrated by the idea that we needed to humanize. After all, is it not obvious that we are all human? And simultaneously, she was driven to shift our community's language and our collective understanding from them and other to we and us. She was a tireless advocate for peace, and she knew that to achieve peace, there must be justice. And to secure justice, there must be truth. And the truth must be revealed, brought into the light, and shared. Today, with international news organizations blocked from even entering Gaza, and the Israeli military silencing, censoring, detaining, and killing journalists and their families, at least 116 in the region in just the past year, it's no small thing for NPR to have producer Anas Baba on the ground in Gaza, sharing voices and images and stories of Palestinians. The role of the media to hold those in power accountable and to seek out, listen to, and amplify the voices of the most vulnerable has perhaps never been more important. To share the facts and the truth of what's happening in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Israel, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, Sudan, and so many other places around the world. When Dr. Shaheen was here in 2012, he spoke with hope about the future. He mentioned with great pride a young international correspondent who had been the recipient of the Shaheen Scholarship and who had recently been named NPR's Cairo Bureau Chief. We are so happy to have Leila with us here today. In 2004, after graduating from Northeastern University, Leila Fadel began her career in journalism at the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. She began covering the Iraq War in 2005 for Knight Ridder and later for McClatchy. I hope I have these things right. By 2006, she had completed 2 postings in Iraq and reported on Israel's war with Hezbollah in Lebanon, not in London. I'm not rewriting history here. Her coverage of the devastating human toll of the Iraq War earned her the George Polk Award in 2007. In 2010, she joined the Washington Post and covered the anti-government protests, uprisings, and rebellions in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Syria. In July 2012, Fadel joined NPR and covered the aftermath of the Arab Spring. She was presented with the Lowell Thomas Award from the Overseas Press Club for her coverage of the 2013 coup in Egypt and its impact on the country and on Egyptian families. In 2016, she was the Council on Foreign Relations Edward R. Murrow Fellow. In 2017 and 2023, she earned Gracie Awards, and her series on NPR, Muslims in America, A New Generation, in collaboration with National Geographic, won the prestigious Goldziher Prize in 2019. As a national correspondent for NPR, Fadel reported on policing and race following the murder of George Floyd, and later on, the jarring inequities COVID has revealed in the healthcare system. In 2022, she became a host of Morning Edition, bringing her unique perspective and voice and amazing ability to pronounce Arabic names to NPR's flagship news program, which is listened to by an estimated 12 million people every week. Leila's fearless commitment to truth-telling, compelling storytelling, and dedication to the principles of journalism were recognized this year when she was honored with the Ray R. Irani Lifetime Achievement Award by the American Task Force on Lebanon, and in March, she moderated a lively panel discussion at South by Southwest on U.S. leadership in a multipolar world, and I encourage you all to give that a listen. Please join me in giving a warm Toledo welcome to Leila Fadel.
Thank you so much. That's kind of hard to follow. That was one of the kindest introductions, but also it was so beautiful to hear about your parents. And I think the special thing about doing this lecture and following all the distinguished speakers that have been here before me is what Maryse and Ramzy Mikhail stood for. They were bridge builders, peacemakers, and ambassadors of understanding. Particularly Maryse, who dedicated her life and her legacy to advocating for social justice and peace across faiths, races, and ethnicities. She was, after all, an educator. And any educator wanted to share the missing pieces of stories people think they know, people think they fully understand, until they get another perspective, a forgotten voice that doesn't get the same reach as the louder or more powerful voices who have such easy access to the mic. So I think of my journalism very similarly, a job where sharing the missing pieces of stories is our most important work, to give the most vulnerable a platform that carries their voices to the world and to the powerful. It's why it's so special for me to be here and to have you in the audience, Maryse and Ramzy Mikhail's family, as well as all of you from the community. Now, I do something very different than what Maryse, can you not hear me? Oh man, I'm a quiet talker, I need a loud mic, but I'll project. Now, can you all hear me in the back? None of you can hear me. Okay, I'm gonna try to project even louder. Yeah. Do we have a wireless? Okay, because I want people to be able to hear me. Okay, well, momentarily I'll be able to be heard. Yeah. Well, how do I turn this on though? It's on?
if you can hear me, I'll just put this here. Can you all hear me now? Or is this on? It's better? Do you want me to start over? It's kind of awkward. Anyways, to recap, I'm really happy to be here. So I was saying that I do something very different than the activism that Maryse Mikhail did. I don't protest. I don't lobby policy makers or advocate for one particular point of view. But I do advocate for the truth. I do bear witness and work to fairly and accurately document realities on the ground, even when it's hard, unpopular, or dangerous. Now, I'm going to use quite the cliche here, journalism crime, although there's a lot of cliches in journalism. We try to avoid them. But that's not going to stop me today. Right now, as I speak to you, we're living through a time in this country that is marked by deep division, by polarization, by hate, and threats to liberal democracy. And it's not unique to the United States. Europe is living through the same phenomenon as wars are fought for power, resources, revenge, and supremacy, from Sudan to Ukraine to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. In these moments of deep unrest, division, anger, and violence, get ready, here's my cliche. The easiest way to discount the message and conceal the truth is to shoot the messenger, both literally and figuratively. Well, guess who the messenger is? It's journalists, from big outlets like mine, who have power and access, to freelancers with no backing from big institutions. They risk their lives at times and work tirelessly to bring the realities of this world and this country to your living room or your car radios or your phones. Just listen to us anywhere you have it. Do we journalists always get it exactly right? No. Does history sometimes tell a different story with the benefit of hindsight and time? Yes. But we are here, especially in public media, on a mission to inform as best we can with the facts as we know them. Sometimes those facts are concealed purposely, distorted in the fog of violence and lack of access, or by nefarious actors twisting the narrative to serve their goals. We try to sort through all of that, bring you what can be vetted, share with you who is doing what and why. And sometimes the truth is hard to hear, especially for so many of us that have a clearly held worldview of how things should be, who is good and who is bad. But often our worldviews are limited by our lived experiences and the information we have access to, whether by choice, censorship, or algorithms online that keep us in our comfortable echo chambers. The thing is, simple stories that just have you nodding and agreeing, those aren't the ones that challenge us to grow, to understand, to build community. I think the more than 20 years I've been a journalist, what I've learned is it's easy to try and tie a story neatly up into boxes and choose a victim and a villain. But that story will most often be wrong. I spent a lot of my career covering conflict, revolutions, and division, and in those moments you really see the beauty and courage human beings are capable of, but also the cruelty and inhumanity human beings are capable of. A lot of that has to do with trying to survive in our hardest moments, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are helping and who we are hurting. After all, it's easier to dismiss truly awful things that humans do to each other by deciding someone in that equation just isn't as human, doesn't mourn their children the same way, or value their life. It's a common tactic by rulers suppressing dissent to dehumanize the dissenter, to demonize them. But let me go back before I get to today to tell you about how I came to do this work, to host NPR's flagship morning news program, Morning Edition, and its companion. It's only 15 minutes, but I would recommend the show as well. It's 2 hours, worth your time. Now, much like Maryse and Ramzy and Mikhail, I straddled two very different regions my whole life. I was born in Saudi Arabia to a Lebanese American dad who immigrated to the U.S. and an American mom. They met in college at Western in Michigan and ended up in Saudi Arabia for a good job that provided for our large family and my dad's extended family. He was one of 12 kids. My mother and father brought them all to the U.S. when the Lebanese Civil War threatened to take their lives in the 1970s. Their future is here, their history and ancestry there. Now, trying to help 12 families get started in the U.S. takes money, and when the opportunity presented itself, my immediate family relocated to Saudi Arabia the year I was born. With my dad's new position and my mom's career as an educator, they put all 5 of their children through college and helped so many of my cousins and uncles and aunts get on their feet in the United States. It was life-changing for my family, but I didn't know any of that. I just knew I got to grow up in this country I wasn't from, with other kids from all over the world who were also there because of job opportunities their parents got. So imagine in my class of 18 kids, we represented 12 nationalities. In this small town of Yambra, Saudi Arabia, I was exposed to the world. I think it's what put me on this path of storytelling, of leaning into our differences rather than being afraid or threatened by them. As Maryse, Mikhail's mother would say, no one is better than anybody else. I grew up around some of the most historic moments of that time in the region. I was in Saudi Arabia when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in the 90s. American Marines docked in our small town and we had them over for dinner. We had gas masks in our house and a safe room set up with tape on the windows and juice boxes for days. In the summers, I would go to Lebanon in the midst of that civil war and come to the United States. Despite the war in my father's country, my parents took us because they wanted us to know the 2 places that made them who they are and that made their 5 children who we are. And so politics, world events, and what violence or the threat of violence does to a society were at the center of our universe always. And at first I didn't know I would be someone who would end up documenting the same types of historic moments we lived through or would discuss at our dinner table. Like a lot of immigrant dads, my father, of course, wanted me to be a doctor. So my freshman year, I was pre-med. I took my first biology class, barely passed, and realized science is not my thing. And you're welcome. I think I've saved a lot of lives by not being a doctor. You're welcome. And I started searching for a new path. I had lived through these historic moments in this region. During that time, so often I watched American media tell the stories of where I lived, and I didn't see myself. I didn't see people like our friends, my family. There was something two-dimensional about the way Middle Easterners were covered, as if violence was somehow just inherent in our DNA. It was divorced from the vibrancy of hospitality, music, poetry, and love that I knew in this region. It was divorced from the history where Europeans drew arbitrary borders and then left the Middle East and North Africa to deal with the aftermath of those decisions. So I decided to try and tell these missing stories and add some of the nuance and context I wish I had existed when I was a kid. I didn't know it would lead me to NPR and Morning Edition. I didn't know I would cover the U.S. invasion of Iraq and its occupation, the wave of uprisings in the Middle East for when people demanded better governance, representative governments, and an end to corruption. I didn't know I would cover the U.S. and the fault lines of race and identity, the grave threats to democracy here, and government overreach that has hurt citizens and civil liberties. But I knew I wanted the unseen, the unheard, to have a voice. And I've spent my career looking for those voices and putting them in stories for the world to read, for the world to hear, for the world to understand the humanity of people like them and people different from them. I truly started that work in Iraq, when at 24 I moved to cover a misguided, deadly war that the United States waged. I was afraid, not of the war around me, but I was afraid that I would fail in truly telling the stories of Iraqis trying to survive regime change, the dismantling of their country, the societal division that came with that, and the civil war that was born from the U.S. war and occupation. It was my job to make sure that these stories got back to the United States, to policymakers making decisions that would change people's lives forever. I did that through people. The pregnant women who were inducing and scheduling cesareans so they wouldn't be caught on the dangerous roads of Baghdad after dark and shot by insurgents or U.S. forces who mistook their speeding vehicle for a threat. In the sectarian war, I documented the disillusion of society as people were killed for their sect, religion, or ethnicity. Marriages were falling apart because the Sunni and Shia Arab Iraqi were no longer safe in the same neighborhood. I watched the greatest minds flee the country as sectarian militias and insurgents became the rulers of their neighborhoods. Before they left, they burned their books in the backyard so they wouldn't be mistaken as collaborators with the Americans or collaborators of the so-called other side of a senseless civil war that devastated so many and empowered a select few. Much of that violence is gone, but the legacy of that occupation and war lives on even as Baghdad has returned to a bustling capital. It was in Iraq that I learned the power of truth and what people would do to stop it. We became targets for what we wrote, who we were, but also for armed extremists angry at what the U.S. was doing in Iraq. The walls between us and the people we were supposed to cover grew higher every day because we needed to live to tell their stories. From there, I moved to Egypt just 2 weeks before protesters demanded that their autocratic leader leave. Those protests in 2011 were filled with hope. I remember a professor weeping in Tahrir Square in the center of Cairo the day Hosni Mubarak stepped down. His granddaughter was born that same day, and he said she would get to live in a freer Egypt. Hold your head up high, he chanted with other protesters. You are Egyptian. But when Mubarak stepped down, the unity dissolved among the protesters, and counter-revolutionary forces took advantage of that moment. The military took control, a military leader came to power, and has successfully won less than fair elections ever since. And today things are stable. Many people live great lives in Egypt, but it is more politically repressive than ever. The human rights activists I knew are under house arrest, in exile, or jailed. Free and independent press is seen as a threat to the status quo. And from Egypt, I covered a wave of revolt across the region. And I think often of one woman I met in Libya, Selwa Boughefis. As her country was in the throes of an uprising against Muammar Gaddafi, the late dictator of the North African nation, I snuck across the border from Egypt, literally walked across, now in hindsight, not the best idea, into a Libya that was in chaos. Protesters had been killed, tortured, and detained for daring to dissent, so some took up arms to fight back, and militias formed along tribal, regional, and religious lines. In the midst of this chaos of people from all walks of life fighting for a free Libya, I watched this human rights lawyer who joined other lawyers and civil rights activists in the early days of the protest just try to keep some type of law in her hometown of Benghazi in eastern Libya as they fought a violent regime. She started a weapons collection program for those who weren't using their guns. She tried to keep seatbelt laws in place and a system of justice when suspected informants and prisoners of war were being taken by the rebels and often tortured. She wanted to build civic institutions as they fought for change. For years, she stood for the Libya she wanted, a place where human rights were respected, where there were true justice and religious extremists with guns did not rule or take away choices from citizens. And the last time I saw her in Libya's capital, Tripoli, she was involved in national reconciliation efforts to bridge the gap between warring parties, and she was hopeful just before parliamentary elections in 2014. In her mind, they were a step toward a democratic and stable country. And despite the dangers posed by armed religious extremists who didn't like an outspoken, uncovered Muslim woman pushing her agenda, she went back to her hometown of Benghazi to vote. But she didn't cast that ballot. She was assassinated in her living room, and her husband was disappeared. She was killed for her unwillingness to cede her vision, because she refused to be quiet. Her voice posed a threat to those who disagreed with her, and so she was killed. Now, this is not unique to a faraway place that you may never visit. I can see those trends right here in the United States and in parts of Europe. Today in this country, as citizens head into an incredibly divisive election, we also see threats of religious extremism in a country celebrated for its religious diversity and separation of church and state. We see threats of political violence, largely from right-wing militias, but not exclusively. Some of that comes from the left as well, and we document people unwilling to listen to the other side as they deem their political opponents' enemies to be smited. And the press that tries to cover it, well, what's the best way to discredit fact-based journalism? You kill us. That cliche, shoot the messenger, but you don't have to kill us to shoot the messenger. You make the truth relative. You push lies like the election was stolen in 2020, so that clear facts suddenly become disputed. And then you make the journalist the enemy. Shoot the messenger, keep the power. Now you see, information is a powerful tool. And if you are the keeper of the narrative, you alone then control the story. And if you control the story, there is no accountability when it's needed. That's why so often journalists become the targets of violence from states, militant groups, and armed gangs. It might be as simple as barring us from entering certain countries or monitoring our reporting and targeting our sources. It might be by trying to keep us out of a war being waged that may violate international law and the rules of war. Or it can be as simple as consistently maligning the work, the facts, and the journalists, doing it so often, accusing us of being enemies of the state, that you chip away at the trust needed for the press to truly play the role of accountability holder, of truth teller. Now, I was supposed to be here almost a year ago. I hope you haven't been sitting here. I'm a little late. And I was supposed to be speaking to you at a very different time. But I woke up on October 7th to horrific news. Hamas had attacked southern Israel. the largest attack on a single day in the country's history, and we didn't know how bad it was at first. But by the end of that day, 1,200 people were killed. Armed men targeted military bases and civilians in their homes, young Israelis dancing at a music festival. Those gunmen took hundreds of hostages. So instead of coming here, I flew to Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories to document what had happened and the many, many horrors that would come. A few days after I arrived, I visited a kibbutz on the border with Gaza. I walked into 2 children's bedrooms. The mattresses were stained with blood. The town was eerily quiet. Everyone there had been killed or evacuated. And outside the gates of this kibbutz, a backhoe was sweeping up dead gunmen who had raided this place. I found the home of a survivor, Don Alam, and called him as I looked at the burned-out building. He hid in a safe room waiting for someone to come save him and his family. For hours and hours, the Israeli military did not come. He and his family listened to gunfire, smelled their home burning, and when they finally emerged, his neighborhood was post-apocalyptic. The dead bodies of his neighbors and militants strewn on the manicured lawns and in the midst of rubble. I asked him who he blamed, and he said he didn't know. He just knew they'd been slaughtered, as he put it. As for Gaza, he told me he didn't care what happened to anyone there other than the hostages. Shoot them all, he said. Now, he didn't say this because he is a bad person. He was a scared, traumatized, grieving 23-year-old who wanted to feel safe. I heard that a lot in those early days. Raise Gaza, burn it, shoot them all. And from this man's kibbutz, I could hear the punishing Israeli response underway. The booms were outgoing, and the Palestinian death toll was already mounting. On that day, so early in this violence, already 2,700 people had been killed in the response, 800 of them children. The borders were sealed at that point. Not even food, fuel, or water was being allowed in. Today, that death toll is over 40,000, mostly women and children. But with so little access, experts estimate the loss of life is likely much higher. Now, as international journalists, Israel, as Leila mentioned, won't allow us into Gaza, where more than 2 million people are trapped and living under bombardment in a man-made humanitarian crisis. So we've been depending on the incredible reporting from our Palestinian colleague, Anas Baba, who works with Daniel Estrin, who works out of Israel. And together, they have been telling us the story of this moment. Anas has been doing this as his own neighborhood was destroyed, as he was repeatedly displaced. He documented what was happening at every turn. And seared in my mind is Ranim Hijazi. She was 8 months pregnant in October, the end of October, when an Israeli airstrike struck their residential building and buried her and her family in the rubble. Her arms were mangled and in need of amputation. Her legs burned. Her 1-year-old son was gone. They found him without a head. But Ranim Hijazi survived to give birth to a new life in an operating room where doctors used lights from cell phone cameras because there was no electricity to pull baby Maryam out of her mother. Her namesake, her aunt, was killed in that same airstrike. I also think often of Shema Ahmed, a Palestinian college student I've been speaking with since late October as bombs and artillery fire rained down on her neighborhood in Gaza. She would send me voice memos as she was displaced once, twice, 3, and finally 8 times. She would tell me what it felt like to be lifted off the ground by the power of an airstrike, the dust that gets in your nose and ears. She would describe the life she lived before this all started. Her grandmother's rose garden, her house, the room she redecorated with her sister, and her university. She talked about her professors, her friends, her classroom, and her plan to build a computer on her own when she finally graduated. She so badly wants to go back to school. But that life for Shema is gone. Her neighborhood destroyed, her university now rubble, and she lives in a tent and tries to read what she can off her laptop when she can find a way to charge her computer, or if she gets data on her phone, she downloads anything she can read. In her more recent voice memos, as she documents her own life for the world, the hope has left her voice. She wants the Israeli bombardments to stop. She wants her life back. She says it's slipping away, like everything before was just a dream. And she, like Don Alam in that southern kibbutz in Israel, started speaking about payback. Nothing, she told me, will be enough to pay back for what she and the people around her are going through. And I think of them both, almost the same age, both wanting a life that is safe and a future that is stable and free. One living under siege in Gaza, the other with sporadic but largely ineffective rocket attacks from Hamas in southern Israel until that horrific attack on October 7th that destroyed his community. Both are traumatized and speaking about revenge. That is the nature of human beings when you've been through something terrible. I also met a lot of people who leaned into a different instinct. I think of Noam Katzman, whose brother Chaim was killed in a different kibbutz. And just days after that attack, instead of talking about revenge, he talked about how this wouldn't work. If you kill us and we kill them, we grow up to hate each other. That was his message to the world in that moment. And for saying that in a public cafe, people walked up to them and asked, "Are you pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian?" And they told them, "I'm pro-life, and I speak in the name of my dead brother." Now, none of them, they're all young, they're all powerless. They're at the mercy of the decision makers that are currently making the decisions that this war continues, from Benjamin Netanyahu to Hamas. The US, Iran, Russia, world actors. They're just people in their 20s wanting to live. And Shemat, Noam, Donalam, Ranim, there are a handful of so many voices we're able to get on NPR from around Israel, from southern Lebanon, from northern Israel, from Gaza, from the occupied Palestinian territories, because of our correspondents on the ground who are so committed to this story. Not to pick sides, but to make sure you get all facets, even when we're barred from getting to one part of the story other than Enes. Now, our work in all these places is vital to give listeners a full picture of societies living through this moment and those in power who are making the decisions. If we don't have access, we can't provide a full picture. And covering this story, I have a page missing here, but I can tell you by memory. Covering this story, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists, has been the most deadly ever for journalists since the group started documenting the killing of journalists in 1992. 2 Israeli journalists killed in southern Israel, 3 in Lebanon, and the vast, vast majority, at least 116 Palestinian media workers and journalists killed in Gaza. Now, my colleagues need to be protected so they can do their work. We need the messengers and the messages they bring. It is the only way to stay informed and stay empowered as citizens of this world. So I ask you to support the work. You can complain about the work, you can make us better, but support the work and make sure we survive. Thank you so much for listening.